have made, and if she, when she grows up or later on in her professional or school life, face those challenges, she has someone to look back and see, well, okay, my mom was able to do it, so maybe I am able to do it, and just use that to propel her forward.
Because they learn by example.
Yes.
Yeah.
If I were to, because one of the goals is to challenge gender stereotypes. But what if I were to question and say that we're not in 1920s anymore, and that there have been significant progress in terms of the workforce being more gender friendly and gender sensitive than it was before. Even the schools are more gender sensitive and more gender friendly. Like a simple example of a girl getting pregnant and being kicked out of school, that seems to be waning out. But the work
it still exists,
but it's not.
It's still wrong, and it still exists. I don't want to give the wrong impression to viewers. It still exists.
Yes, it's surely not in the way that it was when it was automatic. It was, the girl didn't even wait to get to school to get kicked out. It was just, so we have moved forward in certain areas. I'm not saying that there's not grounds and reason to move forward more, but could you talk to us about what some of the, even though we've made progress, some of the challenges that we have in terms of stereotypes in the workplace, particularly in a situation where the workplace is becoming a little bit flatter. Take, for example, for auto mechanic. In the old days, you had to run, you need to beat the iron to get it out. Now there are power tools, there's a lift, you get it up, and there's a computer box. So a lot of what used to be done by brawn is now being done by intellect and technology. Doesn't that make it a little bit easier and change the kind of skills in terms of actually doing the job as opposed to being prepared for the job that you would need? I'm trying to make sure we don't paint a very dire picture that, this world has gone so it's a man's world and it's completely horrible, let's kill all the men, and women need to be completely focused on.
I can appreciate that. And just let me back up a little bit, because
Sure.
it would be remiss of me not to mention, but coming here today was all a part of an effort of the UN Gender Theme Group, which is an interagency group of the United Nations system in Belize, and this exists in several other countries, to lead in gender mainstreaming and raising issues of empowerment and human rights for women and girls, etc. And of course, we collaborated with the Office of the Special Envoy to ask schools to join us today in wearing yellow as a way to observe the day. So hence I'm wearing a version of yellow.
You should have told us, man, and I'm yellow
I
too.
know, right? But clearly the memo was not quite circulated. We intended to engage the schools first, and then we're like, we should bring everybody else on board. And of course that went out too late. But for next year.
Absolutely.
So we decided to do all of this to bring awareness to the day. Now, yes, a lot of strides have been made, but there would be no need to have a thing such as an interagency, UN interagency group specific to gender if it were no longer an issue. The Sustainable Development Goals has gender as a cross-cutting theme. I mean, that would not have been so just in 2015 if we did not still have an issue with gender across the globe. Now, of course, the different countries are at different levels of progress when it comes to that. And of course, Belize, we won't deny it, is quite ahead of a lot of other countries where people have just been getting this year the right to drive and, and things like that. So yes, we're quite advanced, but not because we're advanced in something, it means that we must stop making strides to continue to improve. People are entitled to their human rights, and so we cannot say, "Oh, you've been given some of these rights, so we're good now." That's not the way how human rights works. So we have to keep sending these messages, and we have to recognize that a lot of these things that are being perpetrated against women and girls are things that are deeply rooted in gender inequality. And until we address that at the root cause, as the root cause of everything, then we will not be able to address the other issues. So while things are more automated, And yes, now there's a lot of brain work being required, because in people's psyche, it's already a man's world and it's a man's job. They are still the ones being encouraged to go there. And so we have to change the way we're thinking, and this is the reason why there is such a thing as an International Day of the Girl Child. Like I said earlier, it's not because we're not saying that boys don't have needs as well or have issues as well, but whenever you're trying to change what is already a norm, what people do naturally, without even thinking about it, because it's so deeply embedded in their culture and in their mentalities, then there's a need for affirmative action where you actually have to extract this one thing and put it out there and say, listen, we have to address it.
Give it focused attention.
Yes.
Can I jump in there, because you're touching on something I think that is fundamentally important, and we've spoken on this issue in different conversations, but it's so fitting here, and that is just how we naturally socialize our girls and boys, and how there is a global move, and in Belize as well, to really break as best as we can, reshape how we're training girls to be women and how we're training boys to be men. It's both ways. It's minimizing sometimes a lot of the pressure we put on boys, and empowering girls to recognize that they can go far beyond what we once used to think. But when you have parents who've been raised in a particular way, and then they have children, and I know nobody gets the parenting manual, and you figure out children as you go along. And how do you encourage people? What's being done to really make this shift? I mean, it could be simple things in school systems. You know, the girls sweep, the boys lift the chairs. The girl does sewing, the boy does woodwork. The girl has to do home ec. Those are within the schools. In the homes, oh, the girl shouldn't do something because she'll scrape her legs and get hurt, while the boys should take all the licks. And these are some of the what seems to be minute perspectives in the roles between boys and girls, but they have a larger impact to play in where we strive to be in the future. Can you tie that into us, and how do we dig in deeper to breaking the what has been the status quo of how we socialize boys and girls? And I'm sure you ladies can share your personal examples of this as well.
Yeah. Honestly, these type to address something like this really requires the efforts of many sectors, and all levels as well. You cannot do this in isolation. It's not just on the parents. It's not just on the school systems. It's also on the faith-based organization. It's on communities. It's on individuals. Because we want, one of the things that oftentimes is ignored is the fact that we need to recognize that young people themselves, women themselves, have a certain agency, that we ought to allow them to advocate for their own rights and to advocate for those things that they want. So this is where all of the empowerment comes in. It cannot always be about how we help to ensure that you get what you're supposed to get, but how do we empower our young girls coming up to say, you know what, this is how it was in my house. I did all the cleaning, and this is how I see it was with my friends, etc., etc. But I know that I have human rights, and I know that this is what I want to do, and I know that I'm entitled to these things if I want it. And so it's all about taking this multifaceted approach and tackling the issue at every level, from every sector, whether it's through health, education, all the different sectors that we would think are not applicable to addressing this issue.
But I think in following up Kevin's point, in seeing what he says is more of a flat perspective. In other words, some may say, listen, the opportunities exist, the jobs are there. If the women want it, they should just go for it. The issue, I think, is sometimes having girls and women believe and see that they can in going in a non-traditional role.
Can I just jump in there, because that is a very controversial thought, because once again we put back the blame onto the female mind, and I think that something very important that we should raise, going right back to his point, is that it's not necessarily that the playing field has been leveled. It is just, I think, a lot of strides in appearance, because we have learned to play the game. and a game that was set forth, as I said, with a lot of the mechanisms catered towards the male gender versus the female one. And that's why we're seeing this shift from the traditional female behavioral context. And I always feel that the gender movement, unlike a lot of other movements, whether you want to reference the movement against racism, whether you want to reference the LGBT movement, the gender movement for some reason has always taken on a level of sensitivity, and I'm not sure why. And it results in a degree of compromise all the time at the end of the day, always a degree of compromise. And so you're laughing because I know you're feeling me. It always results with a degree of compromise and saying, okay, let's not take it too strongly or let's not take it too far. Is it really an issue? But Shanea is in a completely different sector from I am. We're all in different sectors, and we're showing you that this is what we're seeing. So evidently it is still very much there, and it really still comes down to who has the influence at the end of the day, and that influence is not in majority female. It is very still much misrepresented in that level. And so I would not want to see especially the Belizean movement, which has recently kicked up, compromise in any way in this. The field is not leveled. The changes that we're seeing is a behavioral change to suit a status quo that was set forth from before. So that is what we need to alter.
But
give Shanea a chance to.
Can I just challenge that a little to say that the Belizean female movement hasn't just started up. I mean, the pioneers, some of the people who have stood up for women's rights in this country. You know, I don't want to call any names because I'm going to miss names and my head is going to be chewed off. But there have been some stellar women who have started this movement. That's why we have a women's department. That's why we have different things and different organizations that have been out. But what I wanted to, before I let you jump in, I want to get this off my mind, if you'll allow me, which is that we have to talk about some cultural realities. And Belize is a melting pot of cultures, and there are certain cultures which don't encourage, it's cultural, it's embedded in the culture, they don't encourage work in that culture for women. A woman's role is primarily seen functionally to be at home, and which is work in itself, but not in the traditional sense that you guys are talking about. For example, you look at the Mayan community or the Mennonite community, which is attached to a religious imperative. How do you balance that out, and how does that factor in terms of the numbers and the way that we look at empowering and gaining skills of women in the workforce?
Okay. Is what you were going to say related?
No, she wanted to respond to the previous point, yeah.
No, but in terms of that, like she said earlier, right, 50% are female and 50, so the overall workforce is 50-50. If we're supposed to be able to survive as a country, especially when it comes to, like she said before, the sustainable development goal, one of it is poverty and the right to food. If we don't include or find the balance and include, like you said, the traditional, the Mayas, the Mennonite, to help us not even globally, like locally feed our population, then who is going to do it? We're going to rely on external sources, and we have seen how that goes. Like, we are held hostage to trade if it's a certain price, or even like with the oil. But in terms of basic food, we have to include everybody, and I guess maybe do something to reach out to those communities for them to see how important it is for us to work together as a whole, for us just basically to provide the basics for all humans, food and the right to shelter. If we have this 50-50 and half of the population is not doing anything, how are we going to survive as a nation?
So to go back to your question, you know, couple weeks ago we supported UN, UNFPA, UNICEF, supported NCFC in convening a workshop to address the issue of child marriage and early unions. And of course, the way forward with that is to develop a roadmap to address that issue in country. And that's one of the issues that are embedded in culture. But at the root of that is, I should say, are two things. poverty and gender inequality. It's a driver for many things. And so going back to the culture and the question that you asked, human rights, if we understand human rights for what they are, it does not respect creed or ethnicity or nationality or origin or religion. People have basic human rights, and which culture or any other type of institution should not supersede. So when we find that there are practices, even in culture, that goes against what a person's human rights are, then it ought to be challenged. We should not sit back and say, oh, this is culture, this is how we have been doing it. Yeah. It does not make it right simply because majority does it or because we've been doing it for the longest time. Yeah. And I agree with you. Women from before have made a lot of strides in Belize, and this is why we need to ensure that the work that they've done before does not go to naught. We have to make sure that the women that they've fought, the future women that they did not even know or met or had any idea would come into existence, they were fighting for these things for the future women. Yeah. So we have to now ensure that we continue what they've started.
I feel that in saying that we are still struggling is in no way dismissing what has been done in the past.
Yeah.
Because there have been pioneers. Mm-hmm. But we need to talk about what I think is one of the larger issues here. And I've heard Shanea and Khadija mention it within their own respective fields. Women in leadership.
Yes.
And we are failing, as Belize,
yes,
in having women represented in the decision-making positions in this country. And no matter what anybody still says, because they think it's cute, it's not 2-to-1 population in Belize. It's not more men than women. It's 50-50. And that is not represented in the decision-making personalities that we see. I want to challenge as to what this does for women in our society, but also the perspective of our young girls as they are growing up. Because not only do we not see sufficient representation, but we also see women politicians or aspiring leaders being held at a completely different standard than men. We have open assault on women within our highest institutions in our country. You know, and we must take the time to point out that Senator Barnett was appointed, still grateful that she's there, but appointed, did bring the issue of gender-based violence to the Senate just the other day, showing that when you have representation, the issues that do affect women do have a platform.
Yes.
But how can we say we are progressing where one of the most important areas of our development as a country struggles to make progress in representation?
Marlene, this is why it's important for us to set aside days like today to talk about it, because we need to bring all the forces together. Everybody has to join forces to continue talking about the issue, to advocate for the issue, for us to address how is it that we are preparing our girls for their future. What are we preparing them for? Preparing them to be service providers, or service workers, I should say, nurses and teachers. We continue to prepare them to be like that. We continue to prepare them to take care of families and to take care of friends and to take care of strangers, whether it's in a public hospital, or we continue to train our women in that way. And so what we need to address as a country, all sectors, all levels, even in the homes, how are we preparing our girls for the future? There are some things, there are certain status quos that currently exist that we realistically cannot expect for there to be an instant change overnight. A lot of these things are generational. So we're going to have what we're promoting here, and we're going to have to deal with the ways of old, and these things are going to collide. But eventually, if we reach the masses that are growing up, they are eventually going to be able to change that reality as they continue to enter into non-traditional areas and fields. So it's not only about the STEM areas, the science, technology, and engineering, mathematics, but also politics, leadership, entrepreneurship. All of these things have to be advocated for. And so we want to invite all the sectors across the country to join us in advocating for these issues, for employers to take a real close look at their practices, their human resource practices, their recruitment practices, their human resource development practices, and for individuals to look at how it is that they are socializing their girls and even their boys, because it's about ensuring gender equality. So it's about not taking advantage of a boy's physical strength and treating our girls as if though they're frail. You know, all of those things gets into their psyche and influences their decisions in terms of the paths that they choose in life, you know, in terms of their career.
Can I shove in some testosterone in here again? Which is, because this conversation that you're having is from a girl perspective, but surely your overall narrative is to include everybody to move us forward, and that's the reason why you're focusing on this day on women in the workforce. But I wanted to talk about there is where we are in a society, we have to reach there before we can change it to move forward. And there are certain risks which are different for women than they are for men in different workforces. And that's the reason why, for example, those risks and those challenges, risks, not challenges, that's why probably you see more men being taximen, security guards, because there are certain built-in social risks. How do we balance that aspect of it in terms of preparing women to deal in those areas where they're not traditionally in, to deal with the risks? How do we deal with that?
Again, you asked earlier how we would address the issue, and I said that it would have been multiple sectors. We have to look at the issue of insecurity. It does affect a person's choices. Maybe we have our females who are desirous of being drivers, but because of the insecurity, they would not venture in that field because of the insecurity. So this requires the government, the state, that has ultimate responsibility for social protection, to look at all of these angles in terms of encouraging women to choose different career paths. It's not only about opening the doors and say, okay, fine, here, you can take all the engineering and science and technology that you want, but what about the actual working conditions when they enter into those fields? What about the actual conditions of society? So those things do have to be addressed. And of course, it doesn't hurt for women to also be encouraged to learn some self-defense skills, to be taught general precaution. And of course, if we socialize them to be afraid when they're younger, and we keep them locked up and they don't get the same amount of play as boys, and you treat girls as frail, then it's likely that even in a situation that is not as dangerous as it might seem, it would appear dangerous to that person because of.
But there's also a very important point there, and I keep on saying it. Women don't rape themselves. This is about boys. And what we teach them about the value of a woman. Yes, and I'm a bit frustrated sometimes when I don't hear this enough. We keep on talking about protecting girls, and we do, because this is the society we're in now. But when do we start saying in the future, okay, tell girls don't let people touch you? Yeah, we'll continue that message. But tell boys that women aren't objects. And so I had to get in there because it's something that nags my brain. But beyond that, though, the larger issue of women and being in a society, it's twofold. And I know it's challenging, and I know it's challenging being pioneers as well, because you're working for a different future while battling the remnants of the past.
Yeah.
And so while it's a transitional, it's like puberty, that really disgusting over hormonal time. I'm hoping it's puberty because it means a different adulthood is coming. But, you know, some of the basic skills I think we don't communicate as often, which is just assertiveness for women.
Yeah, I think.
And I know this is an issue because you girls work in male-dominated fields, so you'll be able to tell me. It's not just speaking up. No. It's that speaking up in a way where a man would be easily comfortable to say anything. You are highly critiqued. You're probably shunned, ignored. And this isn't Belize. This is global. Tell me about that.
It's not what you say. It's how you say it. And so, like you said, you have to be assertive. You could say the same things, and I think they normally look at women as being too emotional or stuff like that. But if you're being assertive and you say what you mean and mean what you say, then I don't see what any other way how the male, or even if it's a male dominated thing, wouldn't listen. Because if you say something and people agreed, whether you're male or female, you would agree if they're being assertive and just speaking up. Don't think because somebody might not agree with you with what you're saying that you don't say it. You just say it. And don't apologize, because oftentimes women apologize for things. If you say it, just say it and leave it at that. I've attended a women's conference, and that was one of the message. Never apologize for what you say or what you do, because if you start apologizing, then they don't take what you have said, whether it was something good or brilliant, they don't take it seriously. So say
Don't apologize.
Yes, never apologize for saying something.
Wow.
Yeah, and to a certain level, we can be very much more practical about this approach, because, for instance, sometimes it's as simple as bringing awareness to the situation. Yeah. An example I go by every day, and it might seem very small to somebody, but it was a very big change for me in the whole transition when I first started my career. The first job I had was on a field site excavating for oil, and you might think it's funny, but you, as an engineer, you have to get field work in. And I'm on the field, and there's no bathroom on the field. We're in bush. We're in a bush. There's no bathroom there. Had that struck anybody before? There are about 60 men on site, and there's me. And just the next day, I went and I told them, listen, I have to get my field time in. So you guys need to figure out something. I'm not laying the responsibility on me to figure out something in this context. Sometimes, you know, and I like how you brought up that why we're putting the responsibility back on the women when we're trying to challenge all of these environments that they're going into. The system has to kind of facilitate sometimes as well, because, as I said, the playing field is suited towards a certain way. So the next day I told them, I said, well, you know what, this is a situation. Can you help me out?
Awareness.
The next day there was an apology. We're so sorry. Like it just had never come up before.
Because it's not an issue.
Correct.
For them.
Correct. And it might seem small, but it's very practical and it's very monumental for that company. I went back 2 years later. There's still a bathroom there. There was no female after me, but there is still one there.
See, the guys
That's a change.
The guys apologize. See, the guys apologize.
It's a perfect example of
No, but that's also an
things are
issue that
embedded in culture.
Yeah.
It's in culture. And it's
Okay,
not
we're out
always
of time.
monitored.
We're out of time, but I gotta ask you: is there anything else happening in terms of celebrating this day that we should let the public know?
Yes. Well, there's going to be. You're familiar with U-Report. I think
Yes.
UNICEF was here to talk about that several times. There is going to be a survey on U-Report that basically asks about how we prepare girls for the world of work, and so it's just going to get a general opinion from the public on that. We're going to be doing a little challenge on an app called Kahoot. We'll share it so that you can maybe put on your social media pages for the public to see, so that they can answer some questions around the International Day of the Girl Child and issues related to women, so we can spread more awareness, just so that we can keep having the conversation around this issue. And of course, wear yellow. So who has time to go back home, or who's still getting ready to put on something yellow? Just so that it's a conversation piece for today to say I'm wearing yellow because this is the day and we're talking about the girl force.
Well, thank you for a very stimulating conversation and sharing your personal experiences. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
We're going to go ahead and take a break. When we come back, we'll be talking about the 49th anniversary of Carl H. Menzies, so stay tuned.